Okay, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get things started. Still waiting for Boris to join for the discussion around the database, which he's joining now. See, invoke his name and he'll join. So we've got, there's probably a little bit of feedback from the work group meeting. We had a call this morning with the TSC, kind of discussed what was gone through in the work group meeting. Basically, the feeling from the TSC is that we should focus on, one, doing any cleanups we need to do on the IPsec portion of security, and then the second piece would be to start looking at the TLS offload as the next set of use case driven implementations around the networking APIs. So that's the feedback from the TSC group. Just wanted to pass that on to the team here. The other subject that we've got on the meeting is to talk about the infrastructure database. So I'm going to turn that over to Demetrius and Boris, who have been discussing this so that they can kind of go through it with everyone, and then we can start having any additional discussions around that.
Before jumping into that, can we spend a couple of minutes on discussing the TSC topic that you brought up?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that.
What is the proposal? How we supposed to ramp up the TLS proxy or TLS termination?
So in terms of trying to prioritize things from the use case perspective that we went through in the workshop, they said the next priority of an implementation that we should look at doing is to do the TLS offload. I did point out that we have to do this by priority because we need to have contributors, and we only have just a few people that are contributing. So we can't go boil the ocean. We have to look at things very focused, and we have to do things in order. So just to cue things up, that's really the next work stream to start thinking about is TLS offload. But again, we're limited by resources and contributors right now. Does that help, Boris?
Thanks.
Yeah. So let me turn it over to both you guys so that you can bring up the discussion around the infrastructure database that we need to put in place for things like the VPN offload and potentially other solutions that we come up with.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. We have discussed at the previous meeting that maybe we need or we want to have an abstract storage interface layer between the actual code that we have in OPI bridge and the backend database that we are going to use in order to abstract the communication with the database or the set and get commands. And of course, we have pointed out that we need also to support transactions, and that is kind of hard when we have this abstract library, because we need to actually implement transactions in the abstract library, and also the database that actually will sit behind it needs to also support transaction. So we feel that, and of course, other people can actually give feedback on that. Also, if Jan is here, that maybe I'm missing something, so Jan can actually comment. But we feel that it will not be easy to actually create an abstract interface for storage. And even if we do that, we will not be able to support any databases. We just can support only database that supports transactions, really. And also it will take like a lot of time to implement something like this. Is not a trivial task. So in terms of how fast we implement stuff, that would be a significant blow. I will say. Yeah. So from our position, we would like to skip that and have a more tight coupling between the InfraDB and the Redis without any abstraction layer in between.
Any feedback around that?
We're really against this approach. Consulted with several experts in Dell, and we have a pretty good understanding on how to build the abstractions in this space. And your needs are absolutely understood and the use case is clear, but tightly coupling the business logic with a specific implementation is absolutely a bad idea. That is the feedback that I got from everybody, that all the senior architects that we discussed this. I think that the next, at least for us, the next action item and the next step will be, we need to show the group the design again, or maybe we need to come up with a new design again, because there are a lot of elements here that we are discussing verbally and need to be really put on paper and discussed properly. For example, we have the gRPC coming in, handling in the gRPC handlers with different Go routines being spin up. Are we thread safe? Are we not thread safe? We need to make sure we discuss that. Are we taking global logs? Storing the data in the database is not enough, because we need to then, of course, as we discussed, publish it. But in case of publish fails, we need to roll back the database transaction. So do we commit before publish or do we commit after publish? Both has pros and cons. So there are a lot of details that are not being discussed here. Maybe Dimitrios and Jan, you have your internal design being done, but I think we cannot continue this in an open source manner if we are not discussing the design issues and then implementing this together. Otherwise, we'll just, bring issues, all the different ideas, package this, package that. So that's one point that I wanted to make. The second point is, even with Redis, right? Eventually, we'll have to implement some kind of abstraction on ourselves, right? Because for mockery, we cannot spin up Redis database. For mocking interfaces, we'll have to use the in-memory database. So at least we are going to have already two implementations for that. Then we can discuss it.
Why is that? I mean, why can't you spin up a Redis instance as part of the mock?
We can. It's
in-memory
not very.
database.
We can. It's not very popular in the Go language ecosystem to spin up database during the mock testing. Usually during the mock testing, we use Go maps functions or in-memory databases instead of the Redis in order to expedite the testing and reduce or decouple that. So usually what's done on all those packages, all those repositories in the repository design pattern, is we at least support two implementations, one Redis, one with key value store using the Go maps, and then one you initialize during the production in the server, and one you initialize during the mocking of unit testing. But again, what you're saying can be done is just not very popular approach.
I think I am afraid that we are very much shooting with cannons on sparrows, right? That's a German saying, but I hope you understand what I'm after.
Yes.
We need to be very careful that we don't over-engineer the solution, especially
Absolutely.
If we cannot just easily pull in existing open source components that do what we want. Essentially, if I look at what we need, we need a database that can persist to file. We need transaction protection, and we need a PubSub mechanism, so that preferably a PubSub mechanism that where the subscribers can sit outside the process that actually stores the data in the database, so that we have a modular design. Those are the three key requirements, and we need to fulfill those, I think.
Yeah. And we need to sit and write down the design, how it will work. Exactly like I said, where we take the global log, how we do the transaction, where the first is, then the publish, If publish is not successful, do we actually roll back the transaction from the database?
Yeah, those are all detailed questions that we can discuss,
Exactly.
but I think they are not driving the decision or design whether we need to fully implement an abstract layer that hides the actual database and then do plugins for the databases.
The abstract layer is implementation details. I feel that we're missing still the design itself, right? So once we have the design in place, we can then think what kind of implementation we can use. I feel that once we go with our own Go Redis implementation, for example, and the mockery and all of that stuff, and you before that you even consider Badger. So all of this leads me to a desire to not implement this ourselves, but to actually use the existing packages. And if this specific package is not good enough, absolutely, we can discuss it and switch it. But all those packages for Key Value Store provide a pretty good abstraction for exactly what we need. And I'm happy to discuss all the pros and cons. But saying that with the transactions, even for me, even we're using natively Redis client, I'm not sure I fully understand how we do the transactions because we never discussed where we're taking the global locks, how we do the rollbacks and all of that stuff. So if we can discuss that in more details, then I think the implementation will fall nicely immediately after that, whether we're using abstraction or we're using Redis client directly or we're using something else. And the same discussion with the persistent and Redis client will also apply to the pub sub model. I already have 3-4 proposals as alternatives to the Redis pub sub mechanism that we can use to publish the changes. So we can also start the discussion on what implementation we're choosing for that. But again, these are, I think, implementation details that we'll get to. But first, let's maybe lay out. We understand the components. We have the gRPC handlers, we have the persistent store, we have some kind of pub sub mechanism, and then we have the subscribers on the pub sub that will actually translate it to the FRR and to the Linux kernel via Netlink, and then we can discuss also the plugins to actual hardware for specific vendors. The high-level blocks are clear, but the flow and the actual actions that we do in transition between those objects is absolutely, for me, still unclear. Once we resolve those kind of questions, maybe it will help us to actually choose the best implementation or go with your proposal is implementing everything ourselves from scratch. Sounds reasonable?
I don't think we are proposing to write everything from scratch. I mean, that's just the opposite. We want to do as minimal possible implementation in order to interface an existing database that satisfies most of our requirements.
The minimal possible implementation is to use existing Go Key Value Store package.
Yeah, but that's not enough, as we know. It doesn't provide pub sub, it doesn't provide transaction mechanisms. So we have to implement everything around that, or try to pull together various bits and pieces, and that is a lot of effort.
I agree.
I don't subscribe to that.
I agree, but I don't think that even with taking the Go Redis client will provide us with all the necessary synchronization and locking in the transaction space. Because, as I said, in addition to just the atomic transaction of touching several objects, we also need to solve the issue between a transaction as a global RPC handler between the database and the pub sub model. So anyways, I feel we need to take some kind of global lock. If we're doing that, then maybe the transactional database is not needed at all, because anyways, we are taking a global lock for this kind of high-level transaction. And I would like to at least to try to design and avoid any global locks if possible. So for that detail is not clear for me how we do the transaction, even if we're doing atomic transaction in the database level. So maybe we over-designing or over-requirement having the transaction and atomic operations in the database level. Maybe we don't need it because we'll have atomic and transaction on the more high level because we need to synchronize several elements, not just the database.
Yeah. If you can live with a global lock to serialize everything in the gRPC handler, and you have no other entity that is working on the database and modifying it, then maybe you're right. But I'm not 100% sure that that is the case.
I agree with you 100%. This is why I'm saying let's go back to the drawing table and let's try to hash out flows and see that they are actual viable and acceptable for everybody, the flows and all the locking mechanisms that we need. If we come up, then we have 2 locking, one for gRPC handler and one we need additional transaction for the Redis. For sure, I'm not against it. Let's go and implement. That's easy. But I'm not convinced yet what exactly transaction and locking mechanism we actually need in this implementation. That's my biggest concern. Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah.
On the opposite, I don't want to over-design. I want to use as much as possible the existing packages. And as you say, this specific package may not answer our needs, and I question that because maybe it is if we are considering some other operations. So then you will probably bring up the notion of background operations, right, on the database that we also need to perform, which are unrelated to gRPC calls maybe, right? So we need to discuss all of those flows, and then we can see what we're locking, what we're not locking. If we want to move quickly into the implementation, which also acceptable by me, I feel that utilizing the GoKV proposal that I have as a draft pull request without supporting transaction yet at this level, and then introducing the PubSub mechanism next, and then in parallel designing either global lock or removing that and going natively with Redis client is all acceptable by me. We can also introduce a new interfaces as watch and transaction start, transaction end. I saw that in many packages, or we can find a better package that supports transactions, which I already saw a couple of examples. We can always do that, which will help us actually end up with, I think, a good iteration, which will support persistence before it supports transactions, which may be a good progression. I don't know. That's my suggestion. If we can do it that in parallel, that maybe we progressing our implementation in that way, even if we need to redesign it later, but that gives us a good abstraction and good iterations on the implementation. But again, that's a proposal. Otherwise, we have nothing. Today, we have in-memory Go maps. What I propose will give us already Redis implementation, which gives us persistence and not transactions. I agree with you. Then we can do and discuss PubSub mechanism, either with Redis or other proposals that I have. Then we'll have PubSub. Then we can separate the 2 implementation in different Go routines and do communication and PubSub between them. And then we can also, in parallel, while we're doing that implementation and not blocking our progress, we can in parallel discuss transactions and global lock-in mechanisms that will definitely end up with redesigning some of this, but at least we're making good progression. But it's up to the group to decide whether it's a good progression or a bad progression.
Hey, Boris, this is Chris. I wanted to mention that, many people probably know Redis is the core database and PubSub mechanism used in Sonic. And I don't pretend to be a Sonic expert, but the Sonic working group has put in man-years of blood, sweat, and tears using Redis as the database. And even now it's going to be challenged by trying to accommodate large-scale Dash configurations. And they're encountering issues of scale and whatnot, which might or might not be an issue for this group. But I would submit that if we're going to go down the Redis path with this group, we get someone who really understands the Redis issues that Sonic dealt with and deals with, just to avoid pitfalls, if nothing else. And there's probably some best practices embedded in Sonic, and there's probably some regrettable practices that have, legacy on their side. So I would just throw that out there.
That's why we have Venkat here. Venkat is very familiar with Sonic and representing here Sonic as well. So,
okay,
yeah,
good. I wasn't trying to disparage anyone on the team, just pointing it out. That's a good role model to follow or not follow, depending on the situation, right?
100% agree.
Yeah, yep. Sonic. For example, for Dash right now, they're starting to store protobufs, actual protobufs as blobs in Redis instead of parsing it down to every config item and storing, individual elements. They're storing protobuf configuration elements because of scale and speed. for Dash.
Yeah, so scale and speed is a concern, but I really hate if we are going with the direction of actually storing the actual protobufs that we get from the user. I rather do the translation, and we have really good direction. At least for I have a really good direction propose how can we do translation between two objects, but I would really like to try and separate the protobufs coming from the gRPC user to the objects that we actually store in the actual database. And we can use some Go techniques to achieve that by doing like JSON, marshalling mapping to the Go structs from the protobufs seamlessly to avoid that translation layer. Yeah, for performance, we might need to consider what Dash is doing. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think again, there's definitely a lot to learn from Sonic, most likely, but the challenge is also much smaller here, I would say.
Yeah.
Because the scale on the XPUs will be much, at least for the use case that we have at hand here, the EVPN gateway, that is maybe hundreds of objects, but not significantly more. We are not talking thousands and thousands or even 10,000s of objects that we need to store.
I don't think this. Yeah, my gut feel is scale's not one of the issues, but there's probably other best and worst practices to be learned, right?
Of course.
Okay, anything else to discuss on this other than the fact that we probably need to come up with what the concept is, the design philosophy behind it, and start mapping that out to put in place?
So just to make it clear, because I would like to have a conclusion, what will be the next steps after this discussion? How we proceed in order to actually at least discuss the new design and what are the pitfalls and if we need a global lock or not, how we proceed, all those discussions where will actually take place, how we proceed from here.
If you ask me, I have two maybe action items to discuss here. First of all, today, at least, I wanted to close the progression. If Dimitrios and Jan and others, if you feel comfortable with moving temporarily with the Go KV abstraction proposal, that will give us a Redis integration. I already spin up the Redis container in the Docker Compose that we support. We will, and this is a proposal, right? You can object to that. So I can merge the pull request after your review that we already have. I will switch from the Go maps on the actual production main to Redis and integrate with the Redis container that we spin up during the CI, and we'll have the persistence layer. Once we've done that, next progression is not to store actual protobufs, but to create a new objects that will map in a very simple translation layer from the protobufs into those objects that we actually store in order to avoid storing the actual protobufs. The next progression will be the pub submodel. And while we're doing all of that on the code,
how about enriching the data model with the reference between these objects that you store in the database that we discussed and that is needed by the business logic?
Come again, Jan? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm wondering when do you want to introduce the enrichment of the objects that we store in the database with mutual references that are injected when the objects are being created and which are needed by the business logic to efficiently deal with the translation of the objects into FRR and Linux configuration and whatever else. When does that happen?
So once we merge the Go KV and when we have persistence with Redis, the next step is decoupling that into a new object. Part of that, we can do it in two pull requests. One is just decoupling and having a new object defined, but which is exactly equivalent to the protobuf, but having a new struct. And the second part can be in the same pull request or in a new pull request. That will be enrichment of the object, which we are storing in the database, that will add more cross-referencing between the objects.
But at that point, you need to think about protection, locking, or transaction. either or. We can't do that without, because it's not safe. It will break.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
Well,
so
what I'm
if I
saying
can-
is until then, we will have the parallel discussion on the design and the global lock. So hopefully, until that is needed, we can already have that discussion, and we can also either after or before that global lock, we can also start already working on the pub sub mechanism, choose the best implementation, whether it's Redis or something else. And already do the subscribers and at least prepare the infrastructure for splitting the code and remove the handlers of the netlink from the gRPC handlers to their own pub sub model. And then we'll have the global log discussion in parallel. Once we figure out how to do that, we will make the appropriate changes to incorporate that.
Can I suggest we open this up as an issue? We put in the steps that we're going to do and then have it. That way it can be iterated on in the issues list and started to be worked.
Yeah,
Once
plus
we
one
agree
on that.
here, we can do that. But I feel that offline discussions so far didn't work for us very well.
Yeah, well, I figure that way if it's in the issues list, if they can see it written down, everybody can see it written down, they can add to it, make suggestions. Both Demetrius, John, and you can work through any issues that you have there in some aspect, and other people can chime in.
Well, no question, I'll do that for sure. But I wanted today, at least face to face, with Dmitris and Jan to come to some kind of conclusion. If they don't like this approach, that's also fine, right? It's all a group effort here.
Right.
I just either we're delaying that and we're having the discussion on the design and global locking mechanism beforehand and delaying any kind of implementation progress, or we're trying at least to parallelize and do that in parallel.
I think what you said, the progression that you proposed makes sense. The only thing that I would really like to avoid is we do a lot of implementation that we later basically throw into the bin because we have to redesign it. I think we should have a clear path on where we want to end up and then do the steps towards that end goal, maybe in smaller steps, but still in the right direction and not wasting any effort. That's my main concern that I have. Otherwise, I'm fine with your approach.
Sure.
And I agree with you, Mark. I think it would be good to write the proposal down in an issue so that we have it and we can work on it and comment and refine it and everyone is aligned.
Yeah, and you can put in even smaller steps if you work through it. Decide, oh, we need to look at this additional step also. Okay, let's move forward with that.
What's your sharing from Sonic?
Oh, the what just Chris mentioned right now, right? The protobuf versus the traditional Sonic format store into the Redis DB. So there was some data, estimation done by the Dash community, and then they've come up with some differences. Basically, looks like they're saving 20 gig for the scale limit that they're trying to achieve in this Dash. So, just for the reference, Boris.
Oh, excellent. Let me copy that into the Slack so we don't lose it. So on the architecture proposal, what are we doing? We're using those calls. We're creating one-off calls. We really need to move forward with this if we don't want to delay too much any of the implementations. And Venkat, we discussed a little bit what Sonic does, but maybe you can maybe deep dive specifically on those issues, right? The storing into database versus then pub sub, what is done synchronously, what is done asynchronously, how the transaction works, whether the same atomicity and transaction problem that Jan and Dmitris present for touching multiple objects, multiple keys in the database, it also exists on the Sonic side and how that was resolved. Maybe we can, like Chris suggested, to learn.
Sure, yeah. So Boris, I would have to go back and listen those conversations. I'm not. I am really in the catch-up mode for those things. And then I'll give my suggestions on that.
And regarding the calls where we're gonna discuss the whole architecture, I prefer to be like a recurring call in a more suitable time for us, because right now it's a bit late for us. So if we are going to use the OPI API every week, maybe it will be difficult for me and Jan to join on those calls. So maybe like a recurring call, like for 2 or 3 times in a more friendly slot, it will be beneficial, and also with a reduced amount of people, probably, because I don't believe that everybody are interested in that. So if we use the API call, it will be quite boring for many people.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can propose some good slots, Demetrius, you and Jan, we'll see what we can align and get the right, then we can get the right set of people.
Okay.
I'll let you guys propose the time slots though, because we want to make sure it's not too late in your evening. All right. Well, great. We got a plan. Well, Boris, I'll let you go ahead and put that into the issues list. You guys can iterate on it. And with that, that's what we've got to cover for this week. Any other topics that anyone wants to bring up? If not, I'll give everyone just a little over 20 minutes back in their schedule. Thank you for joining and thanks for the contributions.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.